What you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Bad boys, what you gonna do?
Hello everyone, it's Petty Officer Romero with Job Corps, and today we have another training video. We've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about arrests. We've talked about how you should maintain yourself as a professional. We've talked about report writing, but probably one of the more important things that all military police officers, security officers have to understand is assessing the threat to your personal safety. When you're out on the job, if you're a security officer, if you are a police officer, when you step onto a scene, you really have to understand what's going on in that situation before you put yourself in jeopardy. Obviously, you can be at a populated mall with lots of people, and generally you're going to feel a lot safer than if you're in some lower end neighborhood protecting a 7-Eleven at 2 o'clock in the morning with a lot of different shady people walking around. And it's important that you can assess the threat to your safety in any situation, even if you're in a really, let's say you were doing security for a very nice upper end housing, a housing community, a gated community. You might feel very safe and have very low threat risk, but if you're called out to some type of domestic abuse situation where tempers are flying and everyone's in a agitated state, there's going to be a situation where you're going to be less safe than you would really consider. So every situation is something that you have to take that into consideration before you walk in the door. All right. The first thing in addressing your personal safety that you will need to consider is your own personal ability, right? How big are you? Are you 6 foot and 175 pounds? Are you 5'7", 135 pounds? Are you 6'5", 300 pounds? That makes a difference. It makes a difference on all kinds of levels. The first thing I would say is that you can't defeat physics. I've seen people who are very well versed in personal defense, guys who have trained as boxers, as martial arts guys, and it's oftentimes very difficult to beat someone who is just physically stronger and bigger than you are. So those are the first things. What kind of condition are you in? Are you a person that works out? Do you like to run? Do you keep yourself in physical shape? Because one of the things that I've learned, and this is an adage from sports, is fatigue makes cowards of us all. And what that means is that even if you are actually pretty strong or pretty big, if you're not in very good shape, most fights only last just over in a minute, less than a minute, 30 seconds. A lot of physical exertion is a lot of energy is put out in a short period of time, and you'll find that it doesn't take long to wear yourself out. So you have to take those things into consideration. Are you dealing with someone that you think you can physically handle? Even if it's someone, let's say, your own size, or do you feel that you're in a position where if you did get into a physical altercation that you, have the skill set? Have you been trained in any type of self-defense, martial arts, to just subdue a suspect? Have you been trained in any of those things? Because if you haven't, it's going to make things very difficult if you're trying to stop anything from happening or arrest someone or anything. If you're by yourself, that's another consideration. Are you going to be on patrol? You come across a situation, you're by yourself. In many situations like that, it's just best to not even to be more than just observe. If you're in a position where there are 2 or 3 guys doing something and you have no means of escape and you're not physically capable of handling the situation, if it gets physical, then you're going to want to consider just getting out. So if those, know yourself, and if you know that you are not capable of beating one person in a physical altercation, much less 2 or 3, then you have to make the personal decision that you probably want to stay out of a situation unless you have backup. So that's the first thing that you want to keep in mind. All right. So we talked about knowing yourself. And the thing that I'd also like to talk about before we move on to the next line item per se is, look, when you're young, you might think that you can do more than you really can. So the point is, you always want to go home the way you came to work. You want to go home safe. Make sure that before you get into an altercation, you've tried everything to avoid it. This is not a macho thing where we're trying to figure out who is the strongest and the biggest and the toughest. This is a situation where you're just trying to do a job, and you just simply can't go into work every day looking for an altercation. So there's so many things involved that any opportunity to avoid it is what you want to do. But we've already looked at ourselves. We have a good idea of what our physical condition is, what our training is like. Are we capable of getting into an altercation and faring well? The next thing that we're going to want to talk about is escape. Okay? If you get into a situation and you simply cannot avoid it, there's nothing wrong. You are not there to get into physical altercations. So if I were going to be a security guard or a patrol officer, the first thing that I would do, I even do it just for my training. When I go into, a movie theater, I always make sure I know where the exits are in case there's a fire or God forbid, a shooter. Or, you always want to be aware of your surroundings. But if I was, let's say, a security guard, I would want to know my environment. So if I'm working a 7-Eleven, I want to know, where does this alleyway end? Does it end just by another street, or does it end with a big brick wall and you either run into that alley trying to get away from something and you realize it's a big brick wall? Do you know that there's a back door where maybe you can run through a back door of your particular, I keep using a 7-Eleven. You can run in the back door and then lock it so that you can lock the people out so you can escape. Listen, I get pride and all that stuff, but at the end of the day, man, you're getting chased by 2 or 3 people. You get into a situation that you can't get out of, you need to have an escape plan. So always be aware of your surroundings. Always be aware of what you're going to do if things happen that you cannot control and you cannot get away from. So know your surroundings. Know what you can do to get out of there. All right. So I alluded to this, but you're going to want to know what you're getting into. We talked about knowing yourself. We talked about knowing your escape. One of the things you're going to want to know about is the threat. And as much as information as you can gather, you're going to want to study the threat. Now, okay, you don't always have, and I say study, that implies that you take a book home and you do research, and sometimes you have to do it mentally. And the scariest part of this is that you don't know your threat well enough to really have a firm grasp. Again, we're using this 7-Eleven hypothetical situation. If you look over there and you see some high school kids and they're skateboarding, you have to use some common sense that tells you that you'd probably be able to walk over there and say, hey guys, look, I need y'all to get out of here. We're not allowed to do it. It's against the rules. And they'd probably comply, right? But if you look over there and you see some guy, and again, look, I'm 5'11", 200 pounds. You know what I'm saying? I have a pretty good background in not only self-defense, but in aggressive techniques. At the end of the day, am I going to go into a situation where I want to go up against a guy who's 6'4", 6'5", 300 pounds? No, there's a good chance that you won't you won't fare well. And at very best, you'll end up getting hurt, even if you win. So you have to know, is there one guy? Is there 2 guys? 3 guys? Look at the people. Maybe it's a husband and wife who went out and had too much to drink and they're trying to get something for their trip home and they're acting crazy in the parking lot. And you should know that there are certain situations that you might be able to get into and you won't have too many problems with it. But there are other situations that you will have more problems with. So it's important to kind of try to understand the situation and know your threat. And again, you can only go by your gut feeling. And listen, use caution. I keep reiterating it. I just think about certain situations where maybe when I was a lot younger, you might walk into a situation and say, I'm going to take care of this. But I'd ask you, for what? What are you doing this for? Are you going to go into a situation where you potentially could get into an altercation if you don't have the tools to make sure that it doesn't turn into something ugly? So the point of this is to make sure that you know who you're dealing with as best you can, and use common sense before you go and address the situation where, again, you have 3 or 4 guys, they're drunk, they're being loud and obnoxious, and they just, everything about it says that, man, these guys might not appreciate somebody telling them something that, so if you're going to address the situation, you don't want to do it with hostility. If you go and say, hey guys, can you please move along, and they respond aggressively, man, hey, hands up, look, I don't want any problems, I'm just doing my job, and walk away. There's nothing to say that you have to get into an altercation. You have to make them do what you want them to do, or else what, will you get fired? Your safety's not worth it. And more times than not, and again, it depends on the situation you're in. Your employer, if you're a security guard, probably doesn't want you to get into altercations anyway. If you're a police officer, more than likely you're going to have backup or the tools necessary to subdue someone if it should happen. And ultimately, with a police officer, you have a lot more respect. So you could probably get away with some things where people know that, man, I'm not going to mess with this guy because he's a police officer, and that's going to bring down heat that I don't want to be involved in. So anyway, there you go. Study the threat, and we have one more. All right, so we've talked about several things. The last thing that I'm really going to address in this your personal safety and threat assessment is know your tools, okay? When you are in a situation and you are going to get into something where, let's say we talked about having 3 guys or 4 guys, and they look like, they've been drinking, and, it's an unsafe situation. You need to know, do you have other backup available to you? Do you have a radio? Can you call for help? Can you call for the police? Is this a situation where you might want to have the police on the line and say, when you walk up to them, guys, I need to ask you to leave. I have the police on the line. I don't want to have them come out, but if I do, it's going to be trouble for you guys. Whatever it is, understand that. Do you have other security guards in the area that can come to your assistance? Because, these 2 or 3 guys that might be acting silly, they're going to behave differently if you have 2 or 3 other guys with you. They're going to behave differently if you have a patrol car. People just respond differently to that. And you have some protection. Do you have a weapon? Do you have a baton? Do you have mace? Again, you have to understand, back to the prior subject, just because you have mace, just because you have a baton, if you have 2 or 3 guys, are you going to be able to take all of them out with your baton? What type of training do you have? So, but it's an awareness thing. Again, it's a little old lady who's hanging out with her son while he's skateboarding. You're probably going to be able to ask them to leave and not have a problem. Or you're going to have 4 guys after a night of drinking acting belligerent. You could tell that they're just looking, they're wrestling with each other. They're looking for some physical activity, and you walk up to them and say something, and they're going to be hostile towards you. How are you going to handle that? Do you know that do you have a radio? Do you have a car? Do you have backup? Be aware of all these things. The important thing is that you understand that the threat to your safety, you have to know it, because again, you're not going into this to go home injured. This is something where you're going in to do a job, and you don't want to get put in a position where your safety is jeopardized. So know your equipment, know your surroundings, assess the threat, assess the people that you're dealing with. Are they drunk? Are they, do they look aggressive? Are you going to have problems with them? The point is that you just don't want to get caught in a situation where you can get injured. But anyway, I hope that you take this into consideration. We have some more material. Please review it. And for Job Corps, I'm Petty Officer Romero. If you like the video, please hit like, subscribe, and I appreciate it. Any feedback. Thank you.
Tell me what you gonna do, what you gonna do. Yeah. Bad boys, what you gonna do, what you gonna do when they come for you. Bad boys, What you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you?